Let's talk about something you hear all the time in the news: national debt. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and honestly, it usually sounds pretty terrifying. We hear about trillions of dollars, potential economic collapse, but what's really going on? What does it all mean? Well, let's break it down. I mean, have you ever stopped to think about it? Why is it that almost every single country on the planet is in debt? We're talking everyone, from tiny island nations to the world's biggest superpowers. It kind of feels weird, right? So let's get to the bottom of what's really happening here. And just to wrap your head around the scale we're dealing with, let's look at the United States. Its national debt, a mind-boggling $36 trillion. That's a number so huge, it's almost impossible to really picture. And hey, this is not just an American thing, not by a long shot. Take Japan, for example, a massive global economy. Its national debt is more than twice the size of its entire economy for a whole year. This really proves that we're looking at a truly global phenomenon. Okay, so to make sense of any of this, we've got to start with the absolute basics. What exactly is national debt? At its heart, it's actually pretty simple. National debt is just the total amount of money a country's government has borrowed. You can think of it like a credit card or a loan, just for an entire country. When a government spends more money than it brings in through taxes, which happens a lot, it borrows to make up the difference. The only real difference is the absolutely insane scale, and of course, who's doing all the lending. And here's a super important point that clears up a ton of confusion. When we talk about the national debt, we're only talking about money owed by the federal government. It's not the debt of individual states or cities, and it definitely has nothing to do with your personal student loans or credit card bills. All of that stuff is totally separate. This brings us to a massive and I think really logical question. If a government literally has the power to print its own money, why on earth would it ever need to borrow from anyone? Well, the simple answer is printing unlimited money is a one-way ticket to economic disaster. It causes something called hyperinflation, where your money basically becomes worthless. We've seen this happen in countries like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, and it absolutely destroyed their economies. Borrowing, weirdly enough, actually creates a level of financial discipline. So if just printing cash is off the table, what are the legitimate reasons for borrowing? Well, it really boils down to 5 key things. First, they borrow to cover those budget shortfalls. They also borrow to invest in things that will help the economy grow long-term, like new roads or bridges. They borrow to handle huge unexpected crises. And yep, they even borrow new money to pay off old debt. And finally, it's a tool they use to help steer and manage the economy as a whole. Okay, so if governments are borrowing trillions upon trillions of dollars, who in the world has that kind of money to lend them? It's a great question. Let's follow the money. It turns out the money comes from 3 main places. You've got domestic lenders who are inside the country itself, foreign lenders from other nations and organizations, and sometimes the country's own central bank gets involved. So who are these domestic lenders? Well, you might be surprised to find out that one of them could actually be you. See, anytime someone buys a government savings bond, they're lending money to their country. But of course, the really big lenders are major institutions like commercial banks, huge corporations, and giant investment funds. Now, when you look at the international scene, there are 2 big names you always hear: the World Bank and the IMF. Think of it this way. The World Bank is like a long-term investor, funding big projects like a new highway system or power grid. The IMF, on the other hand, is more like the financial emergency room. It's the lender of last resort, providing short-term loans to countries that are on the very edge of collapse. But those loans usually come with some pretty tough strings attached. And of course, entire countries lend money to each other, big time. For instance, 2 of the biggest foreign owners of U.S. debt are Japan and China. Together, they hold almost $2 trillion worth of U.S. bonds. So with all this talk of trillions of dollars in borrowing, it is so easy to just think, wow, debt is always a bad thing. But is it really? Well, the answer is, it's a bit more complicated than that. You know, debt is really a double-edged sword. It can be good debt when that money is used for smart investments that help the economy grow in the long run, or to keep things stable during a major crisis. But it becomes bad debt when a country gets stuck in a debt trap. That's when you have to borrow new money just to pay the interest on your old loans. That is a seriously dangerous cycle that can lead to a crisis or even a default, which is when a country just can't pay its bills anymore. So this leads us to the million, or maybe I should say the trillion-dollar question. How much debt is actually too much? Is there some magic number? Well, no, there's no single magic number. But economists do have a really important tool to figure it out. It's called the debt to GDP ratio. All this does is it compares the size of a country's debt to the size of its economy. It's a lot like comparing how much money you owe on your loans to your total yearly salary to see if you can handle the payments. Now, while it's definitely not a hard and fast rule, a ratio of 60% or lower is often seen as a pretty manageable and healthy target. But context is everything. Some really strong economies can handle much higher levels of debt just fine, while for others, even a lower ratio could be a huge red flag. So if debt can be dangerous, why not just get rid of it? Like, completely? Can a country actually be 100% debt-free? The short answer is no in our modern global economy. No country is totally debt-free. And honestly, what's even crazier is that for most countries, it's not even a good idea to try to be. Right, why is that? Well, getting to zero debt would mean one of two things: either massive cuts to government spending or huge tax hikes. And either one of those could absolutely crush the economy. But there's an even bigger reason. No government debt means no government bonds. And these bonds are like the bedrock of the entire financial world. They're considered one of the safest investments you can make. All those pension funds that manage our retirement savings, they rely on those bonds to grow our money safely. If you take those away, the whole system gets a lot more risky. So, at the end of the day, the big takeaway from all of this is actually pretty simple. The problem isn't that debt exists. The real issue, the thing that really matters, is how that debt is being managed. And that's the question we should all be asking. It's not, why do we have so much debt, but instead, is this debt being used wisely to invest in our future? That small shift in perspective, well, it changes the entire conversation. Thanks for tuning in.